George Jones was born in London, England on May 10th in the year 1810 and died in New York City on December 30th, 1879. He was known later in his life as Count George Jones. He was an English-American actor, author, journalist, and litigator. Best known for his eccentric behavior later in life. In England, Jones wrote books and gave orations. One of the books that he wrote simply vanished. But why? Well, when you look into the nature of his work, the reason why this book is for the most part unknown is because Count George Jones believed that the descendants of Israel are living in America. Let me show you what I mean. Chapter 1 begins with these words.
The courteous reader, in tracing the fate of Tecumseh, as depicted in the pages of his life, will not fail to observe the strong analogy between the religious sentiments of the chief of the forest, and those of the ancient Hebrews. The language as uttered by Tecumseh, is not written by the pen of fiction, merely to uphold a theory of the brain, but gathered from the archives of a people's history, to support a theory of apparent truth. The present writer will not yield, to any man, in the firm belief, that the Aborigines of North America, but North America only, and the ancient Israelites, are identical, unless controverted by the stern authority of superior historical deductions. We, therefore, have formed an original theory, in reference to the natives of the North, and those of South and Central America, together with the newly discovered ruined cities, in and around Guatemala, and by that theory, have separated into two distinct races, or people, the Aborigines, of the Western Hemisphere.
The history of Tecumseh is not hard to find, but the truth concerning Tecumseh and his brother the prophet. Well, you might need to do a deep dive in order to get legitimate information concerning these two brothers. Tecumseh was born in what is now Ohio, at a time when the far-flung Shawnees were reuniting in their Ohio country homeland. During his childhood, the Shawnees lost territory to the expanding American colonies in a series of border conflicts. Tecumseh's father was killed in a battle against American colonists in 1774. Tecumseh was thereafter mentored by his older brother, Cheeseekau, a noted war chief, who died fighting Americans in 1792. As a young war leader, Tecumseh joined the Shawnee chief, Blue Jacket's armed struggle against further American encroachment, which ended in defeat at the Battle of Fallen Timbers in 1794, and with the loss of most of Ohio, in the 1795 Treaty of Greenville. In 1805, Tecumseh's younger brother, Tenskwatawa, who came to be known as the Shawnee Prophet, founded a religious movement that called upon Native Americans to reject European influences and return to a more traditional lifestyle. In 1808, Tecumseh and Tenskwatawa established Prophetstown, a village in present-day Indiana that grew into a large, multi-tribal community. Tecumseh traveled constantly, spreading the prophet's message and eclipsing his brother in prominence. Tecumseh proclaimed that Native Americans owned their lands in common and urged tribes not to cede more territory unless all agreed. His message alarmed the American leaders, as well as Native leaders who sought accommodation with the United States. In 1811, when Tecumseh was in the South recruiting allies, Americans, under William Henry Harrison, defeated Tenskwatawa at the Battle of Tippecanoe and destroyed Prophetstown. The history of these two brothers, in conjunction with the three-point plan of Thomas Jefferson and also the Muskogee Creek chief, who met with Tecumseh shortly before the War of 1812, and also a presidential-appointed Indian agent, provides proof that the destruction of the Aboriginal natives was paramount in order for the United States to grow into the powerhouse it is today. But I'll have more about that later. For now, let's get a little more content from the Count. Chapter 2 begins with these words.
The Hebrew analogies now claim investigation, and as woman is first in the affections, and in memory, she claims by right upon this, as upon all occasions, the natural precedence. The northern mother, after childbirth, is secluded for a given number of days, varying according to the sex of the newborn infant. By the law of Moses, the mother's purification was to last 40 days, for a male, and 80 days for a female child. All other seclusions are as strict, as when the wife becomes a mother. When a wife becomes a widow, and is childless, her husband's brother marries her. These were essential laws of the Hebrew, and especially the latter, that a name should not be lost in Israel.
I don't know about you, but what this sounds like to me is that Count George Jones is validating what James Adair has published concerning the Aboriginal natives of America. Listen to this passage from the second chapter of this man's book.
The northern Aborigines have a traditional knowledge of the deluge, and the dove of peace, which to them, under the name of the medicine, or mystery bird, is sacred from the arrow of the hunter. They have their Ark of Covenant, in which is deposited some mystery, seen only by the priests of the tribe. It is said to be a shell, and supposed to give out oracular sounds. This is in analogy to the Book of the Laws, placed in the Ark of Covenant by Moses, preceding his death on Mount Nebo. The oracular wisdom of which has guided civilization to this day.
I often like to say to people, just look at it as you would an attorney making the case. I am simply showing some evidence. Now you, the consumer of this evidence, are likened unto the jury. I expect that you will weigh the evidence and draw your own conclusions as to what is the most probable or reasonable truth based on the evidence, regardless of the fact that most historians refuse to bring all the facts of history to the court of public opinion, but will gladly put their unchallenged history into public schools. Well, George Jones seems to agree with the approach to discovering the most likely truth based on all of the evidence. In chapter 3 of his book, he says this:
The following investigation and arrangements of argument are required for the elucidation of this epoch, and then, from the summary of evidence, and from that only the reader, as a jury, will form his verdict. In other words, 1. Are the fine arts of sufficient authority to be received as evidence for establishing historical records or events? 2. The fact of the discovery of the ruined cities in Mexican America, their description, locality, and character, established. 3. The religious and national analogies and traditions between the ancient Tyrians and the Mexican Aborigines will be investigated, and their identity established. 4. The Mexican innovations upon the customs of the Tyrians will be explained. 5. The general history of Phoenicia, but especially the political and commercial history of the Kingdom of Tyrus, its rise and fall, analyzed. 6. The cause of the Tyrian migration to the Western Hemisphere, the means whereby, and the date wherein it was accomplished, the means of concealing the secret of their discovery of the Western continent from the Asiatics and Europeans. 7. The building of their first altars, temples, pyramids, and palaces, and which have remained as unknown in the history of the world, for full 2,150 years. 8. The new discovery of the fulfillment of 5 additional prophecies, by Isaiah, identified and established by the proofs of the Tyrian epoch of this history of ancient America. 9. A recapitulation of the entire subject, and summary of the various evidences of the truth of the Tyrian theory, founded upon analogies, traditions, history, and prophecy.
Before historian James Adair traveled to America, many ministers and preachers believed that the ancient Israelites were living on the American continent. Why they believed this is one of many reasons why the Bang YouTube channel exists. It is unfortunate there were even more individuals that also believed this, but they were more inclined to hide what was called then a theory, and were more inclined to stop this information from gaining recognition among the masses. Like James Adair and the interested ministers and pastors, he used the Holy Bible to make his case, as he was an eyewitness to the disposition, characteristics, and spiritual nature of the Aborigines of America, which were wrongfully called Indians. Count George Jones completed his research on the Aborigines of America close to 70 years after the publication of James Adair's book, The History of the American Indians, right about the time that the Native Americans were completing their forced removal from their native lands. George Jones applied prophecy as a guide to direct his research, and he utilized the known facts of history at that time to validate the beliefs of many who shared the same beliefs and recognized the value of factual history in conjunction with the prophetic word, and together, both prophecy and history. Are they then able to point to the only nations of people who fit into the guiding force of prophecy and the factual evidence that points to these people? What I like most about the research of George Jones is the fact that he revealed, provided, and applied the modern knowledge of his time, which makes it easier for those of us who are realizing today that all of this hidden information is pertinent to our very own life history, our parents, grandparents, and up to our fourth and fifth grandparents, and that all of this history is connected to the very same guiding force of James Adair and George Jones. That guiding force being prophecy. In order to demonstrate the significance of this book, the Bang has decided to leave you with the first two paragraphs of the first chapter entitled Original History of Ancient America, and the complete first chapter of the second book entitled The Nations of Phoenicia. Now, it's audio only. After listening to the audio, if you decide that you would like to have a copy of this book, well, you can get it in a blink if you just click on the link. That's right. The description area of this video has a link to this book. By using this link, you help this channel to continue making video content like this one. We at The Bang appreciate your comments, subscriptions, and the help that you provide by utilizing these links. Now, let's get started with some eye-opening information left to us by George Jones.
The History of Ancient America. Chapter 1. The Original History of Ancient America. Introduction, from the preface to the author's historical work upon the life of Tecumseh, named to be used for South or Central America, the fundamental error of the historians of America, essential opposites in character, rules of argument for illustrating the theory, a sufficient identity of the North to prove two distinct people, the Aborigines wrongfully named Indians by Columbus, the cause of his error and its effects. In the prefatory remarks to the forthcoming work upon the chieftain, Tecumseh, the following language is used, and we avail ourselves of the privilege of extracting from our own storehouse materials for the commencement of this new historical campaign. The courteous reader in tracing the fate of Tecumseh, as depicted in the pages of his life, will not fail to observe the strong analogy between the religious sentiments of the chief of the forest and those of the ancient Hebrews. The language as uttered by Tecumseh is not written by the pen of fiction, merely to uphold a theory of the brain, but gathered from the archives of a people's history, to support a theory of apparent truth. The present writer will not yield to any man in the firm belief that the Aborigines of North America, but North America only, and the ancient Israelites are identical, unless controverted by the stern authority of superior historical deductions. We, therefore, have formed an original theory in reference to the natives of the North and those of South and Central America, together with the newly discovered ruined cities in and around Guatemala, and by that theory have separated into TWO distinct races or people, the Aborigines of the Western Hemisphere. The lately recovered ruins, cities, and temples in Central America, and of which no ancient record is to be found, have shattered the chain of acknowledged history to atoms, and until that chain is again united by a firmly established theory, education herself must pause, ere she can with the wand of truth, point to her rising children the history of the world, or its inhabitants. Suspicion has asserted that all the natives of the continent of Columbus might probably have been originally of Hebrew extraction. The assertion has been made in doubt and trembling, for writers have been confounded by essential contrasts in the religious customs of North and South America. There were no analogies between them, which circumstance should have compelled historians to pursue another path of inquiry, and so attain a conclusive truth, but they found a Gordian knot which they could not unravel, and assuming the impatient weapon of Alexander, they destroyed it. The architecture, however, of the ruins of Copan, Palenque, Uxmal, and their time-honored associates, has furnished a Rosetta Stone to aid the new translation of the hieroglyphical history of, now, ancient America, and if our theory is true, not only have the Israelites walked the land where the sun bestows his last smile, but another nation, in which was retained the primitive language of the Diluvian world, previously trod that soil as Aborigines, and beyond all this, if our thread of Ariadne lead us faithfully, if not, the Almighty Father who gave the thought will pardon its application. Yes, beyond all the bounding feelings leaping at events, at once classic and venerated, do we contemplate another branch of our theory, for, if we do not write in error, and our perfect faith assures us that we do not, then the trembling hand which sought in doubt the Saviour's wounds, has been outstretched in sacred oratory even in those southern wilds, the bold, yet conquered voice which uttered in hallowed and confirmed faith, my Lord and my God, has given forth its missioned eloquence even in the Western Hemisphere, and there, the sainted ashes of that apostle may yet repose. The preceding extract may be viewed as the exordium of an original history to follow, wherein, if we fail, it will be the boldness of the attempt, and not the deed confounds us. Taking as a basis for our illustration the rules of argument, we will first identify one race, and then prove that the existence of another is not only apparent, but absolute. For the convenience of the general reader, the word Mexican, until the true name is established, will be applied throughout the following pages to all Central and South America, for the word South may be confounded with that portion of the Republic of North America so denominated, and especially with the American reader. The fundamental error with all writers upon the Aborigines of America is that they have viewed them as one people. Authors have, therefore, been confounded by the different customs and ceremonies of religion as practiced in the two great divisions of the continent. They have seen that the natives were, to a certain extent, in one part of the vast domain, idolaters, and not in the other, that the North was essentially republican in every aspect of its political existence, while that of Mexican America was as essentially composed of kingdoms and empires, and governed by despotic monarchs, and that republics were interwoven with them, that each man in the North was a warrior and an equal, acknowledging no superior but their leader in time of battle, and should he fall in action, there was not a member of the tribe in which they politically lived, but could have taken his place, and filled it with similar courage and ability. In Mexican America, they were not equal, but from the emperor, they descended by degrees to the serf and slave. In that country, stone and stucco temples and palaces were, and still continue to be found, erected with costly magnificence, and in which were jeweled idols, to which they bent the knee. Their rich dwellings were splendid mansions, adorned with sculptured and beaten gold, and graced with the works of art, and as a people, enjoying all the refined elegances of life. But in the North, their temple was the azure canopy of Jehovah, adorned with its myriads of golden stars, and when beneath that sublime dome, they bent the knee, it was to the Almighty God alone. Their palaces were the gorgeous vistas of the forest, the columns were the gigantic trees, each year increasing in their stateliness, their shadowy and painted roofs were the fast-spreading branches, and nature's tinted foliage, their mansions were those of independent wanderers, even the simple tents of Israel. And as for jeweled idols and figures of beaten gold, they presented the diamonds of the human eye, radiant with intellectual beams, and glancing from the living emblem of the first and priceless image, placed in Eden's garden by the architect of the universe. Notwithstanding these essential opposites in character and policy, to which may be added that of physiognomy, writers have glanced at them as one race, sprung from the same branch of the human family, and without defining which, and when they could not reconcile such apparently unaccountable distinctions and diversities, they have thrown upon the shoulders of the Mexican the mantle of manly virtue belonging to the North, and upon this race they have thrust the idolatrous vices and the festering robes of luxury justly claimed by the former people, and by this easy manner of disposing of a question, have seemingly satisfied themselves that by blending the crimes of both, to the exclusion of the virtues of either, that they were all savages, and no matter from whence they came. Thus have they formed their conclusions concerning 50 millions of human beings, although directly in opposition to evidence of fact, to deductions by relative reasoning, and to all Christian feeling, which alone should have rejected so cruel a decision, founded as it is, not only on slight, but careless investigation. A sufficient identity of the northern native is now required, in order to establish the national distinction between the aborigines of the two Americas. In all civilized countries, when the lex scripta fails to develop, or protect, the historical events and rights of a nation or of an individual, then the lex non scripta is not only not rejected, but it is actually brought forward to establish and support the customs and privileges of a bygone day. This traditionary evidence, handed down from sire to son, is received in proof of a foregone conclusion. It gives an insight into the times, of which no written record is left for the investigation of august posterity. It carries us back to customs, civil, military, and religious, that otherwise might be lost to the archives of history. Admitting, therefore, this train of reasoning, we bring it to bear upon the present important subject, important in the highest degree, for the time is now past when the Western Hemisphere is to be dated from the rediscovery by Columbus. His giant, but over-applauded name, like the ruins of Palenque, is but the lettering of a volume to indicate in the library of the universe that such a work was written. The work itself, i.e., the great continent, has yet to be read, and the historical authors identified, nor will the well-grounded supposition that the Welsh prince, Madoc, colonized in America 2 centuries before the Genos, or that the Norwegian landed 3 centuries anterior to the Welsh, enable us even to unclasp the volume. To accomplish this, and its translation, an historic Iliad must be cast over a period of more than 2,000 annual changes, of nature's revolving but faithful time glass. Granting then, that when the lex scripta will not cover a subject, the lex non scripta must be investigated to establish a position, the first, then, will not apply to the aborigines of the North, for it does not exist, the latter only, or the unwritten history of their race must be had recourse to prove their originality and identity, traceable back to time immemorial, from their present customs and traditions. We think that it will instantly be admitted, that all religious ceremonies are the strongest proofs of the characteristics of a people or race, of which no written history exists. For there is something so indescribably sacred in the conscientious actions of man with the supreme God, that none but the maniac atheist could doubt, that those actions should be received as the living features of a nation, when seen to be recognized and acknowledged, with as much certainty of identity, as when a mother gazes upon her fondly cherished child. The customs forming the analogy between the northern natives and the ancient Israelites will now be reviewed with as much brevity as the subject will permit, in order to establish an essential point of the present theory, viz., the separation of the aborigines into 2 distinct people. The reader, perhaps, will meet us at the threshold of argument by the question, how can an Indian be of Israel? We will answer this, and refute the misnomer before the analogies are investigated. The name Indian, as applied to the original inhabitants of either, or both the Americas, Canada, the islands in, or adjacent to, the Gulf of Mexico, has no authority founded upon truth. The name was given in error, and has been so continued from the time of the Genos to the present day. Throughout this work, no position will be advanced that cannot be defended. The wrongful appellation originated with Columbus, and for proof of the assertion the following is presented. The shadow of the Earth upon the Moon during an eclipse plainly testified that the planet upon which we live was round. The travels of Marco Polo by land to the East Indies, about 1269, related that those lands stretched far towards the east. About 2 centuries after this, it occurred to Columbus, upon perusing those travels, but more especially from having obtained intelligence from the final conquest of the Canary Islands in 1483, and information while resident in England, which circumstances will be investigated hereafter, that by a voyage towards the west, thus travelling, as it were, around the globe, he should meet the extremities of those lands, and as the discovery of a sea passage to the East Indies was the great object of navigation in the 15th century, Columbus made the bold attempt, founded upon previous knowledge of migration, and discovered the island of St. Salvador and those adjacent, and thinking that he had reached the eastern extremity of the Indies according to his theory, he then named those isles the West Indies, because they were discovered by sailing west. The discovery of the continent followed during his 3rd voyage, and believing all the land to be of the Indies, the inhabitants of the isles and of the mainland were, as a natural consequence, called by Columbus under one general appellation, in other words, Indians. Subsequent geographical discoveries have proved the great error of the Genos, but the name of Indian was given at that time, and it has been continued although at variance with the truth, and it has had a material effect in checking inquiry concerning the Aborigines, who having been called Indians, the name seemed at once to specify their origin, but it would have been equally as just if he had determined to sail for Britain, and an unforeseen gale having cast him upon the island of Sardinia, and then from believing that he had reached the intended object of his voyage, he should have called the latter inhabitants British. We, therefore, discard the name of Indian as applied to the natives of the western continent. It will be retained in the tragedy of Tecumseh for local purposes, and write of them as the Aborigines, until, as we advance in this history, they can be identified by a national name, founded upon facts and conclusions.
If you've been to this channel more than once, please subscribe, as it truly does help the channel. Leave a comment, for the Bang looks forward to reading them and replying to them. Also, don't forget to like and share this content with like-minded individuals such as yourself. There's plenty more where this came from. Until next time, this Bang content will end in 3, 2, 1.